When your portable generator starts but produces no power, most people assume the worst. The engine catches on the second pull. It settles into a steady idle, the kind of sound that tells you everything mechanical is working exactly the way it should. But when you plug in a work light and flip the switch, nothing happens. The outlet is dead. Most people hear a running engine and assume the problem must be deep inside the machine, something expensive, something that requires a shop. They let the generator sit in the garage for another 6 months, maybe longer, until eventually it ends up on the curb or at the scrapyard. What they never find out is that the fault almost certainly lives in a single component, roughly the size of a D-cell battery, buried under a metal cover at the back of the alternator housing. It costs somewhere between $5 and $8 on Amazon, and replacing it takes about 15 minutes with a screwdriver. But to understand why this one part matters so much, you have to understand what's actually happening inside a generator when it makes electricity, because the process is stranger than most people think. When a portable generator runs but produces no electricity, the engine isn't the problem. The pistons are firing, the crankshaft is spinning, fuel is burning exactly the way it's supposed to. Everything on the mechanical side of the machine is doing its job. The failure is electrical, and it's happening inside the alternator, the part of the generator that converts motion into current. If you were to hold a multimeter against the outlet while the engine runs, you'd see one of two things. Either the voltage reads absolute zero, or it shows something faint, maybe 2 volts or 5. Enough to prove the alternator isn't completely dead, but nowhere close to the 120 volts your tools need. That faint signal is actually important. It's the ghost of something called residual magnetism, and it's the reason this whole system works in the first place. When the generator was new, that tiny bit of leftover magnetism in the rotor was enough to start a chain reaction that built the voltage up from almost nothing to full output in less than 2 seconds. The question is, what broke the chain? Here's the part that surprises most people. A portable generator doesn't just spin a magnet past a coil and produce electricity the way a middle school science project does. The magnets inside a brushless generator aren't permanent. They're electromagnets, and they need electricity to create the magnetic field that produces more electricity. It sounds circular because it is. The whole system runs on a feedback loop, and the thing that keeps that loop going is a single capacitor wired into the excitation circuit. When you pull the starter cord, the rotor begins to spin. There's a small amount of residual magnetism trapped in the iron core from the last time the generator ran, just enough to induce a weak current in a set of auxiliary windings inside the stator. That current flows into the capacitor, which stores it and releases it back into the rotor's field coil as a stronger DC pulse. The stronger field induces more voltage in the stator, which charges the capacitor further, and that stronger charge drives the field up again. Within about a second, this bootstrapping cycle pushes the output from those initial 2 or 3 volts all the way up to a stable 120. The capacitor is the engine of that entire escalation. Without it, the feedback loop never starts. The residual magnetism produces its faint signal, but there's nothing to amplify it, so the generator just sits there, running perfectly, producing almost nothing. That's what a failed capacitor looks like from the outside, a machine that sounds alive but is electrically flatlined. The capacitor that does all of this is a CBB61, a metallized polypropylene film capacitor about the size of a soup can, sometimes shaped like a half moon, bolted inside the alternator end cover. It's the same type of capacitor you'd find in a ceiling fan or a window air conditioner. Manufacturers use it because it's the cheapest voltage regulation scheme available, a single passive component replacing the circuit boards and carbon brushes that more expensive generators rely on. It's worth knowing that more expensive generators handle this differently. Rather than relying on a capacitor alone, they use what's called an automatic voltage regulator, an AVR, which is a small circuit board that actively monitors and adjusts the field excitation to maintain steady output. That's why this specific $5 fix only applies to conventional brushless generators. If your machine has an AVR, the diagnosis changes. But the vast majority of budget and mid-range portable generators, your Champion 3500 watt, your Harbor Freight Predator, your Generac GP series, use capacitor excitation, no AVR, just the one capacitor doing all the work. And that's the trade-off. The part that saves the manufacturer the most money is also the part most likely to fail. Heat is the primary killer, and generators run hot. There's a widely cited rule in electronics engineering that says every 10-degree rise in operating temperature roughly cuts a capacitor's life in half. Moisture and age do the rest, gradually degrading the dielectric film over 2 or 3 seasons of use without any visible warning. By the time the generator comes out of the garage for the next storm, the capacitor has already drifted too far out of spec to sustain the feedback loop, and the owner is left with a machine that sounds healthy but delivers nothing. I think that's the detail that gets me, how quietly this failure happens. There's no pop or smoke, no dramatic moment. The generator just stops doing the one thing it was built to do. The replacement part is available on Amazon for somewhere between $5 and $10, depending on the microfarad rating your generator needs. Small units, your 2000 watt and 3000 watt machines, typically use a capacitor rated around 12 to 25 microfarads. Larger machines in the 5000 watt range and up usually need something in the 35 to 45 range. The voltage rating should be 450 volts AC or higher. Getting the microfarad value right matters. Too low, and the field won't build enough strength to reach full output. Too high, and the voltage can spike past what the wiring is designed to handle. The job itself is about as complicated as changing a car's air filter. You shut the engine off, remove the bolts holding the alternator end cover in place, and discharge the old capacitor by shorting its terminals with an insulated screwdriver, which produces a loud spark, so gloves are a good idea. After that, it's 2 spade connectors. Pull them off the old unit, press them onto the new one, bolt the cover back on. 15 minutes, maybe 20 if the bolts are rusty. If the capacitor swap doesn't bring things back, the next place to look is the rotating rectifier diodes. Small diodes mounted on the rotor that convert AC from the excitation windings into the DC current the field coil needs. They're the second most common failure point in this type of alternator, and they're also cheap. A failed diode will produce symptoms almost identical to a failed capacitor, so if a new CBB61 doesn't fix the problem, the rectifier assembly is the logical next step. There's one other scenario where a new capacitor alone won't bring the generator back. If the machine has been sitting unused for a long time, the residual magnetism in the rotor may have faded completely. In that case, you need to remagnetize the iron core, a process called flashing the field. The simplest method involves plugging a corded electric drill into the generator's outlet, holding the trigger down, and spinning the chuck backward by hand. The drill acts as a small generator itself, feeding just enough current back into the windings to restore the magnetic seed. When it works, the drill suddenly takes off in your hand as the generator kicks back to life. One thing that doesn't get said often enough in generator content: if you're running any generator, 2000 watts, 5000 watts, it doesn't matter. Carbon monoxide is the real danger. Generators produce CO at levels that can be fatal within minutes in an enclosed space. Outside only, well away from windows and doors. That's not a footnote. It's the thing that actually kills people. Nearly 14% of American homeowners now own at least one portable generator, up from 9% just a few years ago, driven largely by hurricane seasons that keep getting worse. Most of those machines are gasoline-powered conventional generators, the kind with a capacitor-excited alternator. The average lifespan of a light-duty portable unit is somewhere between 5 and 7 years, which means millions of these generators are reaching the age where capacitor failure becomes likely. Inverter generators, the quieter, fuel-efficient machines that have taken over the camping and tailgate market, use a different architecture entirely and don't share this failure mode. But the conventional generator still dominates the home backup market, and that's where the capacitor problem lives. Here's where the math turns uncomfortable. A diagnostic visit at a repair shop starts at $90 and often runs past $150 before anyone even touches a tool. On a generator that cost $300 to $500 new, that single fee can push the repair bill past the point where most people decide it's cheaper to just buy a new one. And so, the old machine goes to the curb. One forum user described hauling 3 dead generators to a scrap dealer and getting $22 for all of them. Machines that, statistically, had a decent chance of needing nothing more than a part you could order on your phone while waiting in line at a gas station. Nobody tracks how many generators get scrapped specifically because of a failed capacitor, but the pattern shows up everywhere. In repair forums, in Facebook marketplace listings that say runs but no power, in scrap yards across the Southeast after every hurricane season. The knowledge to fix them exists. It's been on YouTube for years, in videos with hundreds of thousands of views. The problem was never the part or the skill required. It was knowing the part existed in the first place. There's a certain irony in the fact that the cheapest part inside a generator is the one that decides whether the machine lives or dies. Manufacturers chose capacitor excitation because it saved them money on every unit they built. They weren't designing a trap, they were designing to a price point. But the result is a system where the most failure-prone component is also the one that never gets mentioned in the owner's manual. That's not a conspiracy. It's just a gap between what the machine needs and what the owner knows. And on the other side of that gap, a $5 capacitor is waiting on a warehouse shelf, ready to bring a dead generator back to life. Most people just never find out it's there. That number surprised me more than anything else in this story. Not the $5, but the 14%. That's roughly 1 in 7 American households with a generator in the garage. And some portion of those machines are sitting there right now, perfectly functional, except for one small part that quietly gave up.